following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Greetings, wherever you may be, welcome to Ask Claire along the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm your host, Claire Hall. Very happy to have a couple of other folks joining me on the line. My sometimes co-host, Gabriel Schechter. And good morning, Gabe. How are you, my friend?
Good morning. I'm just fine. It's a day with 2 playoff games to watch, so it's a great day already.
Amen. So you have arranged today's guest, and you are of longer acquaintance with him. He and I have been getting to know each other over these last several minutes, but please introduce our guest and set the framework for this half hour's discussion.
Thank you, Claire. I've been thinking about how many baseball friends I have made over the years through Sabre and Facebook, I think most of all, and how many of them, the majority, I've never met. So my friend Jim Casey rises above that because he and I met exactly once. We have close mutual friends in Colorado who have been telling each of us since the 1970s, you got to meet this guy. He's as crazy about baseball as you are. And it took us until, Jim, maybe a dozen years ago, you'll remember the exact year, when we met once in Cooperstown. Jim has been a competitive... Yeah?
I'm sorry, it was either 2004 or 2005. I do not remember which.
Yeah, that sounds right. Jim has been a competitive pitcher well into middle age, and he was supposed to pitch that day at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown, and we were going to meet. I was going to watch him pitch, and they got rained out. So we went to Cooley's Tavern instead, and we've been good baseball and personal friends ever since. Our friends were right, weren't they, Jim?
They were, absolutely.
Well, that's very cool. So, Jim, tell us a little bit more about your passion for baseball and how you ended up taking up the game, and maybe just, some little nice, simple, easy-to-answer question like what it means to you.
Well, I was born in Washington, D.C. in 1950. My parents were both from Philadelphia. My dad introduced me to the game at a very early age. Took me to my first games at Griffith Stadium to watch the old Senators play. Started playing in CYO, the Catholic version of Little League, and played through high school. Developed other interests when I got to college, like staying out of the Army and sex, and thought that I was done with baseball. I took up tennis. After I got out of college, played tennis pretty seriously until my late 30s, and then suddenly I read an article in the summer of 1988 in the Washington Post that this gentleman named Steve Sigler has started these adult amateur baseball leagues playing on Long Island and is offering franchises. And so the D.C. area started a 30 and over league in 1989. I played in that for 17 years. Other leagues came and went. The other age groups were added in. So that at this point, just to let you know how popular this is, in the D.C. area alone, in age groups of 19 and over, 30 and over, 40 and over, and 50 and over, there are over 250 teams in the D.C. area alone, which is not exactly, the greatest hotbed of people to play baseball. These leagues are huge in warm weather areas like Florida and California where they play year-round. And I was very fortunate to play for as long as I did, have the success I had, and have no serious injuries over all that time. And never having had children, it makes it the absolutely greatest experience of my adult life. Made a lot of good friends through playing ball and had some amazing experiences. My first time in Cooperstown was involved playing in a tournament over 4th of July weekend. How cool is that? Where I got to play a game in Doubleday Field against a team of youngsters from New York City, and managed to be the winning pitcher in a game where we barely hung on at the end. Won the game 13-12, and I got the last out with the bases loaded and 2 outs in the bottom of the 9th inning, where any kind of base hit and we would have lost the game. So
clutch performance.
More great experiences playing than I ever would have expected, and here I am now. I stopped playing at age 55 because I could no longer play up to my personal standards, and I have no regrets about it, but I miss it every day.
Your pitching success without a sore arm, even though you didn't have the strain that professional pitchers have. I just want to, what was the secret to your longevity as a pitcher?
I think my mechanics were perfect. When I was a kid, we were taught to stay balanced all the way through your delivery from start to finish balanced, facing the hitter, ready to field your position, and throw everything straight over the top. And I eventually, later on, added a sidearm curve and a sidearm fastball to my delivery, but I never used them more than 5 or 10 times a game. And I think the simple mechanics of throwing straight over the top and keeping everything balanced is the key. I think that one of the reasons these guys have so many injuries now is because of all the torque they add at the end of their deliveries, spinning off toward first or third base, puts an extra strain on both the shoulder and the leg area on the side off of your throwing arm, and I think that kids now are just being taught bad mechanics. It's just my opinion.
Jim, what about the mental part of the game? What percentage of your success would you credit to your ability to outthink the hitters?
Well, it's I have a fairly analytical turn of mind, and playing in those leagues year in and year out, you face the same hitters all the time. And the one thing I noticed was that only 1 or 2 guys ever made any kind of adjustments to what you were doing to them to get them out. And sitting down talking to some of these guys that I had played with and against for years, they never really thought about how I was getting them out. They just, looked for something in their happy zone, and if they didn't get it, they would swing at what was there. So, I mean, it's not I didn't get lit up from time to time, but fortunately it didn't happen too often.
That's what Catfish Hunter said. Figure out what they want and just give them everything else.
Right.
So
one of Bill James's insights back in the abstract days was the difficulty of the same pitcher doing well against the team 2 starts in a row. He's talking about during the season, but that's magnified in the postseason, which makes Garrett Cole's performance in Game 5 all the more remarkable, don't you think?
Well, to a degree, except that, after what he had done to them the first time around, how could they have any shred of confidence going against him the next time?
Like the Mets against Mike Scott in 1986.
That's the other side of that coin. That's the other side of that coin. You mow a team down, how are they possibly going to be expecting to do any better the next time? And exactly, you bring up Mike Scott. The Mets were deathly afraid of having to face Mike Scott in Game 7 in 1986.
They would have been toast. We all knew that.
Yeah.
Or the Athletics in 1905 with Mathewson.
Right.
Wow.
Now, so what was the difference with Anibal Sanchez last night?
Well, I don't know that it was any different, except that he never allowed himself to fall into a pattern. I don't think he got the same guy out the same way twice. If he got him out with a fastball the first time, he'd get him out with a changeup the next time. So they could never guess with any level of certainty what the next pitch might be.
That harkens back to the kind of pitching we grew up with, where the pitcher who intended to go 8 or 9 innings threw pitches in their first at bat or two strictly to set up how he was going to get them out in the key spot late in the game.
Exactly.
And that's been lost. That's been lost with this dread fear of the third time through the lineup.
Completely. Do you go to any minor league games out there? Do you have any minor league affiliate near you?
Yes.
What level is it?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, the two of us went to a Hillsboro Hops Class A game.
Okay.
It's a Class A,
yeah.
All right, that's a perfect
season
example. What did you see? How were those pitchers treated?
About 3 innings was the limit.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and if they got into a jam, were they allowed to pitch out of the jam?
Not necessarily.
Or were they just replaced? No, they weren't.
Yeah.
So they never learned how to pitch out of trouble.
Yeah.
You know, it's the only how it has become the accepted wisdom that limiting innings and limiting pitches is going to help these guys. I'm completely clueless by, because despite all these attempts to save these guys' arms, pitchers still get hurt at the highest rate in history.
Yeah, this coddling is counterproductive on both levels. It doesn't prevent injuries, and it prevents pitchers from reaching their potential.
Right. If you were to propose that hitters be limited to 50 swings a day, or infielders to 50 ground balls a day, you'd be laughed out of the sport. But somehow it's become gospel that pitchers need to be limited to the number of pitches and innings. What happened to copying the winning formula of the Atlanta Braves of the 1990s, when Leo Mazzoni had these guys throw every day?
Yep.
Oh, well.
Long forgotten, it seems like.
Yep.
So, Gabe mentioned that you've had some experience in Major League Fantasy camps. Any great stories you could share with us?
Yes, I got to go to a fantasy camp 3 years in a row. It was a camp that was unaffiliated with any particular team, though the majority of the ex-players and the majority of campers were from the Boston area. So he had about 5 teams of Boston people. But he also had a guy from Minnesota who organized a team of Twins fans, and there were some ex-Twins there, notably Gene Larkin and Tony Oliva as their coaches. And I got to go to help fill in a Montreal Expos team, because the guy from Montreal, no surprise, couldn't find more than 4 or 5 guys interested in a Montreal Expos fantasy camp. And my coach for all 3 years was Bill Lee, one of the most interesting characters I've ever met. But the most entertaining stuff that happened there was the second year I went, there was also a Baltimore Orioles team. And they got, as coaches of that team, they had Mike Cuellar, Paul Blair, and Mo Drabowski.
Oh, my gosh.
What a group.
Drabowski's locker was fairly close to mine. And the first day of full camp, nothing happened. No pranks, no jokes, no nothing. So Tuesday morning, I get there, and Drabowski is sitting in his locker, and I walked up to him, and I said, hey, Mo, what the hell? He looks at me kind of funny. I said, what, no pranks, no jokes, no nothing yesterday? Why? And he said, honestly, I've never done one of these things before. I know that these guys pay a lot of money for this, and I don't want to piss people off unnecessarily. don't want to get on the wrong side of anybody. I said, well, you could start by doing something to me, if you'd like, and I think that everybody would appreciate it if you would, be Mo Drabowski, because that's what everybody knows you for, other than, Game 1 of the '66 World Series. And he said, okay, fine, I'll get into it. So about 15 minutes later, I'm sitting at my locker reading the sports section of the USA Today, which they'd put several copies around, and suddenly it's on fire. And so there was a sink right there in the middle of the locker room. I didn't have to go all the way to a bathroom. I guess they had that there with soap and paper towels so that guys could, clean their hands after they'd put on their Bengay and their sunblock and whatever else they put on. So I just walked over to the sink, ran some water on it, and put the fire out. But that started to set the tone. And then a little later, maybe half an hour later, all the ex-pros were in having their own meeting in a separate room in the building, and we hear this explosion and find out later that Mo has set off a cherry bomb in there, which has made at least half the guys deaf for the next few hours because it was a relatively small room, and of course it's all cinder blocks, so it's not like the sound has anywhere to go. So that was a good start. Then the next day, early in the morning, we're sitting around, getting dressed and having coffee and donuts, and Mike Cuellar suddenly explodes away from his locker because Grabowski's put a half a dozen snakes in there. And as almost anybody who's a serious fan knows, Cuellar absolutely hates snakes.
Yep.
And so Cuellar's running all over the place, and he's screaming at Drabowski because, of course, he knows he's done it. And there was a few other things went on, but then the coup de grace came Saturday morning when we're getting ready for the pro camper games, and some of I guess Blair and Cuellar had talked to the clubhouse guy, whose brother owns an alligator ranch.
Oh no!
So the lockers were fairly typical. You had an open area at the top where you'd hang shirts and stuff, but there was a place at the bottom with a door on it where you would put other stuff, and if you asked the clubby for a key, you could lock that part of it. So Drabowski goes to get something out of the bottom part where the door is closed, and he pulls the thing open, and a 4-foot alligator, muzzled, comes thrashing out of his locker that had been stowed in there about an hour before. And the alligator is muzzled, so it can't bite anybody, but still, it's obviously not happy, and it's thrashing around the floor of the locker room, and of course, everybody's going nuts. That was by far the most entertaining. And sadly, the next year I got to go again, but Drabowski was not there, and so I talked to the people to make sure that he hadn't been disinvited because of the pranks, and they said no, it was just he had other issues to deal with at home at the time. But God,
my
really
God!
funny.
Well, it sure didn't take him long. How can you say? I guess to get back to major league form. That is beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it.
Jim, you may be the only person I've ever heard of who had to egg on Mo Drabowski to pull a prank.
No doubt. Well, if that's the case, I am proud to have that on my tombstone.
Lordy, but yeah, that was that. I'm just speechless. But from here, maybe we ought to get back to the state of the game and the state of pitching. And Jim, something Gabe and I have been talking about, and we were already going down this path. I mean, it seems like it is becoming, I don't know, a game of where every pitcher is going for a strikeout every time. Every hitter is going for a home run every time. And, we've been saying it for years, but truly it seems like the complete game is becoming an extinct species. And, it's not the game we grew up on. And, Yeah, change is inevitable, but is there any way we might see this trend reversed? And if so, how? Either of you guys?
One thing I noticed, especially in the Washington-Los Angeles series, was the use of their big starters in relief. Strasburg with the 3 key innings in the wild card game. Scherzer, Corbin twice. Once was a disaster, and then Kershaw. I was reminded of Casey Stengel back in the early 50s when he'd put Allie Reynolds, his best pitcher, in to relieve as often as he started in the key spots where at least in this series just concluded, the managers decided, these are my best pitchers in the key spots. These are the guys I'm going to use. And that seems a little a bit the exception these days.
Jim,
well,
any thoughts?
You have to manage completely differently in the playoffs than you do in the regular season. In the regular season, you've got to be aware that, guys can't be stretched out too much. You want to make sure they're going to be ready for their next start or the next day or the next pressure situation. But in the playoffs, it's all hands on deck, and you've got to go with the hot hand as far as hitters go. And, yesterday was a perfect example of that. The Nats had to start Howie Kendrick in that game. He was 8 for 11 off of Michaelis going into that game. Can't leave him on the bench under those circumstances. Then he wound up getting a key hit. There are some guys who show some intelligence on the plate. Yadier Molina is a perfect example of that. That one of those key hits he got against the Braves was in a situation where a lot of guys would think, I need to hit it over the fence. He knew all he needed to do was drive it back up the middle.
That's why he's a Hall of Famer.
I think he's for sure a Hall of Famer. Soto's like that too when he gets 2 strikes on him. He chokes up, he stretches out at the plate, and he tries to make sure he makes at least some kind of contact, at least put the ball in play. You never know what's going to happen.
All right. The players who can do that are going to be more dangerous, obviously.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think
baseball tends to revert to the norm, though, and there's a part of me that's holding out that managers are going to figure out that if they have 4 or 5 real strong arms, to give them most of the innings. Is part of the Nats using their starters in relief so much against the Dodgers, the fact that their bullpen has been such a disaster.
Right. I mean, I know that I'm sure that Davey only trusts 2 or 3 guys down there, and Dave Roberts did the same thing. I mean, he clearly did not trust Kenley Jansen in a big situation,
and it cost them. I was surprised that Kelly stayed in because Kelly had pitched poorly early in the series. He hadn't really done much of anything, but he kept him in. That was it could only be because he didn't trust Jansen, but still. It seems like every year, every bullpen is a hit or miss proposition, no matter what the pedigree and the recent performance of everybody in your bullpen. This year, they could all go to hell and back.
And those situations can completely wreck a guy's career. Drew Storen had that disaster in Game 5 of the division series against the Cardinals in 2012 and was never the same again.
Joba Chamberlain is another example.
Calvin Schiraldi is another example. He was involved in that disaster in Game 6 of the '86 series, and he was never the same again. And Donnie Moore. All you have to do is say Donnie Moore, and we all know what happened to him, unfortunately.
Yeah. I was thinking about him the other day. Yeah.
Yep.
The only guy who went through something like that and survived it and then continued to have a good career was Eckersley. And I feel certain it was because of all the things he'd already been through in his career. He wasn't a young kid like Storr and Schiraldi were.
Right.
Yep. Let me throw something out at you guys. I can't even remember where I read it, but somebody predicting that within a few years some manager will just declare the idea of starters and relievers on his roster to be extinct, kind of going down this path of putting your best pitchers in your best situations and just essentially telling everybody, be ready to go 2 or 3 innings, 2 or 3 times a week, and I will use you as appropriately.
I can see Tampa Bay doing that sometime soon.
Yeah.
Because of their limited resources.
I have to say I would find that deplorable. I have 2 thoughts on that. One reason I'm rooting for Washington and Houston is that I relish the thought of Verlander and Cole taking on Scherzer and Strasburg and Sanchez and Greinke and all these great pitching duel matchups. That's appeals to me. The other thing is, several times this season, following the action on the MLB.com website, they put up a notice if there's a no-hitter after the 6th inning. And more than once I said, oh, let me see who's doing this. And I look, and they've already used 4 pitchers. And I say, screw it. Who cares? Yeah. Who cares? Who cares if 6 pitchers going 5 outs each put together a no-hitter?
Yeah.
And didn't the Astros do
that's
that
what
to
we've
the
been
Yankees
robbed
a few
of.
years ago?
Yeah. Yeah. Houston did it to the Mariners this year.
Yeah.
I think 4 or 5 pitchers combined. Yeah. I want to see a no-hitter. Sanchez was terrific last night. And you knew as soon as he gave up a hit, he'd be out, but he just kept going. He could have done it.
So
I
guess
on the edge of my seat with Doolittle in the game. But he managed to survive.
Yeah, I know you were holding your breath the whole time.
I was, and I'm really glad Hudson will be back tonight.
Even though it's the wrong sport, guys, I want to give a 2-minute warning that we're, running up towards the end of our half hour. So maybe some thoughts to sum up the art of pitching and the state of it at the major league, professional, and maybe even amateur level in 2019.
I'll jump in first. I think the major league pitchers and pitching coaches have nothing to fear but fear itself. They're looking at a lineup and they think that just because the 8th hitter in the lineup can put the ball over the fence, that it's something to be scared of. I think if I were a pitcher now, I'd look at the other team's lineup and I'd see a bunch of 240 hitters and know that I've got a 3-1 or at worst 2-1 natural advantage over everybody in that lineup, and I wouldn't be scared. What do you think, Jim?
The odds are always with the pitcher. Has anybody ever hit over 500? Isn't the highest career batting average 367? You've got 7 guys behind you to help get these guys out, and 1 guy in front of you who is really determined to help you get these guys out. Just one thing, I used to listen when DC didn't have a team, used to listen to Orioles games a lot. Jim Palmer was always doing was always the analyst those years. And he frequently talked about what he called the variable chance fastball. That if you mix up your speeds and location enough, you can actually get people out regularly with batting practice fastballs. And you saw a great example of that last night with Sanchez.
Yep.
He got
Bartolo
lots of guys
Colon
out.
with the Mets. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, hitters, they especially nowadays, they don't like it when a pitcher outthinks them. But to me, that is one of the great charms of the game, that mental battle between the man on the mound and the man at the plate. And let's not lose that, huh?
Yes, I mean, baseball is an
Agreed.
individual sport masquerading as a team sport, because what it's all about is the battle between the pitcher and the hitter.
Very, very well said.
The other guys are just there to help.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Well, the half hour has flown by. To my sometimes co-host, Gabriel Schechter, thank you. To our really special guest, Jim Casey, thank you as well.
Feel free to call on me anytime.
Well, I bet we can. If you've got any more good fantasy camp stories, and I bet you do.
I've got a couple. They don't quite match that, but I've got a couple.
Bill Lee, as you just mentioned his name, certainly one of the most memorable characters in the sport. So for now, we'll sign off for Claire's Corner. Until we meet again, happy trails.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.